Hello and welcome back to Bitcoin with Jake. Today I'm speaking with the Wizard of Aus. Welcome.
Hello, Jake.
How are you this evening?
Really good, really good.
Wonderful. I confessed before the call I was a little tired. It's the evening time here in Melbourne and got a small baby and all the rest of it, so having to rouse myself for the occasion. But talking about Bitcoin, somehow one's energy levels just kind of come flying back. You're like, right, let's get into it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as a starting point, could you please give an introduction as to the projects you're involved in at the moment, so we have an understanding as to what you're up to in the here and now, and then we're going to have a little explore into what brought you to today.
Sure. So I guess the things I'm involved with really are the Bitcoin Brisbane and helping organise and run that. So that's a Bitcoin only group focused up here in Brisbane. We meet once a month. Everyone's welcome. We usually post up on Meetup. There's a Telegram group, and we just try and it's focused entirely on education. So we're trying to answer people's questions, lift their education, send them to resources for things that make their learning journey a bit easier. And the other thing is the Bitcoin Bush Bash, which we hold at the moment 3 times a year in different parts of the country, and help organise and run that.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to finding out how you got to this point. I have to confess, having been recently to the Bitcoin Bush Bash in Beechworth, I had a wonderful time, and I'm sure that you can share many stories of how enjoyable it has been meeting people that are interested in Bitcoin in person, and how you see the space developing. But if you don't mind, we'll take a step back and we'll try and have a think about, what brought you to today. So can you tell us a bit about some of your career, perhaps, or your interests and the moment that you came across Bitcoin? Was it a love at first sight for you, or was it a case of like, this looks like a load of bullshit, I'm going to ignore it for a bit, and someone else suggests again, oh, you better have a look? So just some context as to what your profession was, perhaps, and therefore the lens that you had in which you looked at Bitcoin when you first came across it.
Sure. So I guess I'm at the older end of the typical Bitcoiner scale, closer to retiring than starting my career. And I've spent 35 plus years, almost 40 years in IT, working in usually the big end of town. So large, complex systems, banks, insurance, telco, logistics, public sector, all the big, hairy, complex stuff. So quite surprisingly, it turns out that an understanding of complex systems has been quite useful in understanding Bitcoin. When did I first go? I would like to say that it was a love at first sight, but I'm just the absolute standard story, which is 3 touch points. Someone I know was mining it back in probably 2012. GPU cards, creating digital money. But of course, I was in computing and he wasn't. So what are you talking about? You can just copy and paste that stuff. You can't have digital scarcity. What are you talking about? So that was my first big strikeout. The second one was probably 2015, 16, Wired articles, and not Bitcoin specifically, but Ethereum and the DAO. So I liked the concept and the idea without understanding either Ethereum, and still hadn't understood Bitcoin. And in those first 2 times, like you, very busy with a young family and running a business and living life. And then fast forward to 2017, lots of mania, and then started learning a bit about Bitcoin. Bought some Bitcoin. That then incentivizes you to learn a lot more about Bitcoin. I'd like to say that my Bitcoin journey did not include shitcoins, but it absolutely did. Of many flavors and colors. Spent ages digging into white papers and ICOs, and it probably took me until about the middle of 2018, so probably a year, to eventually twig to the fact that only Bitcoin mattered. And once I'd got to that recognition, I realized that life is short, my time is precious. Bitcoin is as close to a sure bet as you can get in that space. And so I just dumped every single altcoin I had and just put it into Bitcoin. And that was a huge moment of simplicity and clarity. Everything else fell away. I only had one thing to focus on. And all of my great successes in life have come from being very focused on specific things. I'd like to say I always chose the right thing to be focused on. Not always not always the case, but certainly all the successes in life have come from being consistently focused for the long term. So that's probably when it really started for me in 2018. And then I was working in Europe on site with a customer for a couple of weeks in September 2018. And I saw some reference to this conference up in Riga, Honey Badger. And I looked at the conference site, and there were all these weird looking dudes that I'd never heard of. Maybe one or two of them I'd seen on Twitter. And I thought, well, where's Riga? Where's Latvia? Oh, that's the middle weekend I'm in Europe.
Hello.
How much would it cost to go there? It was Bitcoin only, so that was the thing that got me interested. I think it cost me 40 quid to fly up there. And I thought, yeah, well, what else was I going to do on the weekend apart from just work? It's pretty boring. So I went up to Latvia, knew absolutely no one. And that weekend, I probably did a year's worth of learning. It was like putting your mouth over the hose, except it was a fire hydrant. And then your kid brother says, "Are you thirsty?" And they turn it on full blast. It was just 2 days of listening and absorbing and getting my head absolutely full of realizing just how little I knew and just how much there was to learn.
Awesome. And it's a cool moment when you come across a new challenge, a subject, and I don't remember the specific day, but nothing has ever quite caught my attention in the same way that this particular subject has, that is Bitcoin and what brings us together today.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Well, let's get into it. So Wiz, I would love to go back to where you spoke about complex systems and 40 years in IT. What is a complex system for those out there that don't necessarily understand what it means? And perhaps explain a little more as to why understanding that field is an important lens to understanding Bitcoin.
Sure. In some ways, it's helpful in the sense of having a lot of battle scars that come from people making what appear to be small changes in one system that have massive impacts in other systems that weren't immediately apparent. So most large organizations running mainframes in particular will have fairly extensive application portfolios, and they might have 10, 50 or 500 application groups. Each of those application groups may be made up of 2 or 3 programs or 2,000 or 3,000 programs. So there are often millions or tens of millions of lines of code. The applications interact with each other. They interact with other agencies. They interact in a number of different ways. And so you can look at making a small change and think that you've done fairly careful impact analysis and that you understand exactly what's going to happen from that change. And then you make the change and there's all sorts of unexpected consequences that can lead to some pretty catastrophic failures and lots of midnight oil and lots of yelling and screaming. So from that perspective, it's been helpful looking at Bitcoin to go, yeah, the incentive system in Bitcoin is really important, and making what appear to be small changes in Bitcoin's code can have huge consequences. So that part's been useful. The part that I've really had to unlearn was that 30 or 40 years has been spent building closed source software systems for centrally controlled organizations.
Wow.
So command and conquer. Coming into open source and distributed systems was really a very big mindset change. And certainly in the last 5 years, I've gone from thinking, can't trust open source software, really need a trusted vendor for things like security, to completely discarding that mindset and going, the only way that you'll achieve any degree of security in any computer system is to use open source software that is widely used, heavily vetted, with many, many eyes. And Bitcoin would be probably the most heavily scrutinized code base on the planet. Wow. With a very, very significant incentive to do so.
How cool. And I'm just jotting some notes down here. There's so much interesting stuff. That's a big shift. And it's amazing. I mean, this happens to many people I'm talking to on this journey, how, you might have had you have a lens that helps you understand Bitcoin, but then equally what it teaches you is that there's a better way of doing a load of things that you were previously doing. Or better is probably the wrong word. There's an alternative way of doing things to what you were previously doing. And when you start learning about the alternative, you prefer it. In my personal case, I did some a few years in startups, and in hindsight, I was basically being coached by venture capital firms to try and build breakout digital monopolies. That's really what we were trying to create. And so it was all about looking for, high pace traction, and basically getting people either addicted or completely dependent on your software business, and then network effects, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that was modern entrepreneurship. And then suddenly I find myself in the Bitcoin space. And, I was thinking, can you look for interesting Bitcoin businesses to invest in an equity stage and early? And yes, there might be opportunities like that, but actually that's not the point. The point is building this open source platform that helps people interact with no middleman. And it's just a completely different mindset to how I was previously thinking. So that resonates with me a lot, actually. And just on this career in systems. So you were a software developer by trade?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, wow. And so of this shift that you've gone through, then what have you found the most challenging about it? So, as you mentioned, you were building, what was it, closed source, centralized systems, to suddenly say yourself 5 years down the line, a proponent of something totally the opposite. What was the biggest hurdle to unlearn?
I think that's the crux of it, Jake, is that Bitcoin makes you rethink and unlearn many things. And as with a lot of people coming from a technology background like myself, usually you have very little understanding of money and very little understanding of economics. I was probably very typical in the sense that, you save a certain portion of what you earn, don't spend extravagantly. You make sure you've got some resources for rainy days or future plans. But the impact of monetary debasement and the effect on reducing future purchasing power, which is in effect theft, was really quite a bit of a shock. And I say this to some of my younger Bitcoiner friends up here in Brisbane. I'm incredibly jealous. They're less than half my age, and they've discovered in their early 20s what I learned in my 50s. How did I get half a century through life without understanding how money and the financial system worked? Partly we don't teach it, partly I was never interested. I probably could have found out earlier if I'd been interested and dug into it, but didn't. I'm not casting nasturtiums or blaming someone else. But yeah, that's been a big mindset change. And I think to your point about startups and building businesses, I look at that typical Silicon Valley venture capital fueled, debt funded, growth seeking machine as absolutely a function of cheap capital.
Yeah.
It's very much a fiat mindset. The other thing that's probably stood me well, having built a small business over the last 20 years, which has grown largely organically. We've done a couple of acquisitions of foreign software firms over that time, but we've tended to borrow the money rather than seek venture capital, which has worked out well for us. But I didn't come to Bitcoin with a short-term mindset. I came with a long-term mindset to begin with. So that's been very helpful. But thinking about Bitcoin businesses, and there is an explosion of Bitcoin businesses now. The things are not the Bitcoin startups just need to have a different mindset. They can, and I believe will be, hugely successful and powerful. And we are very, very, very early. Early investors will reap a lot of benefit in the medium to long term. Investors seeking returns in the typical 2 to 5 year time frame are going to have to learn to be patient.
I'd love to learn more about the business you've been building. I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. You can share as much or as little as you want, to be honest, but the process of building a business is obviously one of the most challenging things that anyone can ever embark upon. So you're the founder of the company. Do you do it with a team of friends, or just yourself building the business the last 20 years? And how do you see the future with Bitcoin as part of the picture?
One of the best decisions I ever made was not to start the business alone, but started with a partner. And that expanded out to 4 of us in the beginning, and then became 3 of us, which it still is today. And we have a very high degree of respect amongst the 3 of us, and very different perspectives, which leads to some great arguments sometimes. They're not angry screaming arguments. They tend to be, really, why do you think that? And then there's some discussion about it, and then people go away and we think more about it. But experience has taught us that when we have a consensus view, which we reach by quote unquote process, usually that's a pretty powerful consensus and gets us a good outcome. And certainly the big decisions we've made with certainly acquisitions where we've borrowed millions of dollars to do those and paid it back and reaped the benefit of those, and then built on the foundations of those businesses that we've acquired has reinforced that.
And so as the founders of the business, at least one of this partnership of three is a Bitcoin bull. I'm sure you probably talk regularly with the others about it, but have you guys, you haven't? No? Okay, interesting. Well, what I was going to ask is whether or not you guys have taken Bitcoin onto the balance sheet or had any discussions around how that might affect your business.
No, we tend to work very closely together at work, but not outside of work. Okay. So they're certainly aware that I know about Bitcoin. I've shared some resources with them about that. But unfortunately, we don't have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. I would like it if we did, but we don't. And the others will get there in their own time. I do like Panic FOMO's infamous quote of "Everybody buys Bitcoin at the price they deserve."
Yes.
You know, that it sounds a really malevolent quote, but it's not. I think it just reflects the reality that everyone gets Bitcoin when they're ready, and we're all at different life stages and have different things going on, and you moved to Australia just before COVID, and we're in a place where there was very, very long, tough lockdowns, and spent a lot of time. You probably spent a lot more time reading about Bitcoin in those periods than you might otherwise have done if you'd remained in the UK. So
those are like the sliding door moments, aren't they? When you think back and you go, okay, well, that happened. Did that happen for a reason? You just, you could get quite spiritual for a moment, and who knows what it's all about.
Yeah, we're the sum of all that's come before, but that doesn't mean we get to go and look at the alternate path.
Interesting. And so as a small business owner, or small, it might be a big business, I don't know anything about it, but as a business owner, I should rephrase that. Bitcoin is going to change the way that we do business, whether or not that's in how we transfer value to each other around the world, whether or not that's in how we look after the reserves of the business and holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet. But business owners are busy, really fucking busy. And to your point, some of them just haven't even thought about Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin is this thing that pops up in the newspapers from now and then, and generally speaking is slammed by all of the well purported financial newspapers and technology media businesses. They generally all very negative about it. How far are we away from the small to medium business owners understanding Bitcoin, getting it on the balance sheet, and looking to utilize it to build their businesses? And I think of this from the perspective of they'll have merchants transaction fees if they're a retail business in the Lightning Network, or they'll have difficulties in raising capital because they can't show they've got enough on the balance sheet, and so they don't have ways of raising debt, perhaps, or whatever the case might be. Bitcoin solves a bunch of different types of problems for small business owners. Slash maybe you've got 50 grand in the bank and you don't need it for the company right now. But what are you going to do? Give that to a wealth manager who's going to kind of invest it into a portfolio of things in public markets to try and preserve your purchasing power. How do they manage cash flow? What are your thoughts on how small to medium business owners might approach this?
I think it's very, very early. And I think it's not a single brush. And by that, I mean that if I was a small business owner starting off in Australia or pretty much anywhere in the West, then you're unlikely to consider putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Too much risk, not part of your primary mission. why add more complexity when it's not required? So not gonna be front of mind for not this decade, I would think. However, if you happen to live in, say, Argentina or Turkey, or places where money debasement is rampant, or government confiscation of bank accounts and the contents of the bank accounts has happened, or there's been a history of it, then you probably don't need too much nudging to think about using Bitcoin as a unit of account and certainly as a store of value, because the alternative is a lot riskier. And that's why I think that, you know, the West will kind of be forced by necessity last. Everywhere else in the world, where those problems are real today, not, oh, there's a sniff of it, they'll adopt earlier, and they won't need convincing.
And I think this is actually already happening. When you look at user growth, I don't know how trusted this data can be, but places like Vietnam, you know, absolutely booming in terms of this peer-to-peer network. And you don't read that in Wired, for example. You know what I mean? They're not talking about this at all. So what I'd love to ask about is a bit more about Bitcoin Braemar. That's one of my competitors at work. Bitcoin Brisbane. So 2018, you'd fallen in love with Bitcoin, or at least you'd had the epiphany moment of there's only one thing to focus on, which is a key moment in everyone's kind of journey to the space. When did you decide to get involved in a meetup, and what have you learned from that process?
Probably not until about 2019. 2019, I gave a presentation on the Lightning Network. So I've been running a Lightning node in the latter part of 2018, which was pretty early, pretty reckless. But I bought $300 worth of Bitcoin to put on my Lightning node. So 0.1 of a Bitcoin, on the basis that, yeah, I'm prepared to lose that, but Lightning looks really interesting. So I started learning about that, and then I knew one of the guys running a meetup group here in Brisbane. So offered to come along and talk about Lightning, and that was really well attended. First time I sort of stood up and talked about Bitcoin. And I think probably like everybody standing up and talking about Bitcoin the first time, you think, oh, there's so much I don't know. How can I possibly talk about Bitcoin? But there's that old saying that, you know, when one teaches, two learn. So, you know, as you try and explain things, you realize where the gaps in your knowledge are. And you certainly do when the questions start flying. But that drives you to learn more and to communicate more clearly. So that was really the start of that. I met a few people that evening that are now part of Bitcoin Brisbane, and good mates, and have encouraged me to keep going. From that, sort of started catching up with people from time to time, and then I don't know when it was, maybe 2020, I think, we started Bitcoin Brisbane, and it was one of the guys from PayBTC, which is a Bitcoin only exchange based out of Brisbane here, and he kicked that off, Ben. And then, so of course, I was happy to go along and happy to talk on pretty much any subject to do with Bitcoin that I had a basic competency and understanding of. And people started coming along and asking questions and asking for discussions on other things. And then we started making it regular. went from there.
Awesome. It's so nice meeting people in person, especially given the lockdowns that have happened the last couple of years. It's been very refreshing to get out and actually kind of say hello. And often one has a lot in common when you're at a Bitcoin meetup and you've adopted this cryptocurrency. I mean, let's talk about the Bitcoin Bush Bash for a moment. There we were in Beechworth. Grew up in the UK. Never imagined that I'd ever live in Australia, let alone have an Australian baby, an Australian wife, and go to AFL games with my mother-in-law. Just never would have dreamed that would happen. And there I was.
Like winning the goddamn lottery, Jake.
It is, mate. No, I'm loving it. But there I was, in Beechworth, this like little kind of sleepy town, 4 hours north of Melbourne, with some nice wineries, in a room stuffed full of people talking about what is still a very nascent technology. And there we all were, sharing ideas, becoming friends, having some beers, doing whatever. And you're like, what the hell is this? Like, I've never, my first time I've ever experienced anything like it, that's for sure. So yeah, so the Bitcoin Bush Bash, wonderful. I love meeting people in person. So what was the genesis for that?
The genesis of that was a friendship between Hoddle comrades and Sir Hugh and myself. We'd met at the Sydney Bitcoin meetup. So 2019 and 20, traveling a fair bit for work. Those guys live in Canberra. I'm in Brisbane, but sometimes we manage to cross over there. And I was up and down to Canberra quite a bit at one stage, so I'd often catch up with the lads. And then, of course, 2020 came along, and we all spent lots of time at home, and especially in Queensland where they closed the borders, it was quite frustrating. And I remember in early October, we kind of got the sense that the Premier was going to open the borders at the end of October, start of November. And I rang Bill up and I said, where's that place that you and Hugh go to play golf and get on the beers? And he said, oh, Murrurundi. And I said, where the hell is that place? So I've opened up Google Maps, and lo and behold, it's halfway between Canberra and Brisbane. It's up in the, for those of you that are listening, it's in the Hunter Valley, west of Sydney, northwest of Sydney. And so we said, right, first weekend in November. And so we agreed we'd meet there, just stay at the local hotel that Bill knew, and great. That was something to look forward to. I was really looking forward to that. Bit of a drive down there, roughly equivalent drive for him coming up. And we were basically just going to have a day's drive down. That'll be the Friday, day's drive back the Monday. That's all fine. Saturday and Sunday, just chewing the fat, talking the corn, drinking a few beers, having a few laughs. Been too long apart, hadn't seen mates. Lo and behold, a couple of days goes by, and old mates set up the bitcoinbushbash.info website and said, yeah, Wiz and I are meeting in Murrurundi first weekend in November. All Bitcoiners welcome. Let one of us know, and we'll see you there. He put down the contact details for the local accommodation places, and then the messages started rolling in. And so by the time we headed off on the Friday, I thought, oh yeah, there might be, about 20 people said they'd come, and, I've done events and stuff before, and you go, okay, well, 50%, 65% will turn up. So maybe a dozen people, this will be great. Then a couple of people said, are there going to be any presentations or any sessions? I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And I'd been playing around with a few things. I put a few slides together. Anyway, we turn up on the Friday night. There's probably a dozen people there. By Saturday lunchtime, there was about 40 people. So
wow.
there's no registration, there's no cost, there's no KYC. We don't care what your real name is, but there's no altcoins. It's just about Bitcoin. So if you want to learn about Bitcoin and you're interested in Bitcoin, come along. And so that's how it started. So I gave a few sessions, a few other people gave some sessions. JP from Sydney brought his Blockstream satellite, and he and Catan set up the satellite in the beer garden and synced the node connected to the satellite. And then we sent a Lightning transaction to a Telegram bot that relays a message on the satellite stream and received the message on the satellite stream. So that whole satellite stream and computer was only connected to Bitcoin via the satellite, no internet.
Wow.
And that was pretty cool, seeing that and understanding how that worked. And we did lots of other little demonstrations and lots of discussion. And the best thing was the discussion. And that's why at the Bush Bashers, we don't try and rush, okay, you've got 35 minutes to go and get lunch. Next session starts in 35 minutes. It's, let's have a couple of hours for lunch. Why? So you've got plenty of time to talk to people, the interesting nerd over there, that person who gave that session earlier in the morning. I want to go and talk to them. How did they do that? What does it really mean? And so, whether it's breakfast with other Bitcoiners in the place you're staying at, talking to them over a coffee, having lunch with them, or inevitably ending up at the pub having a steak and a feed and a few beers at the end of the day, stretches into the evening, often into the morning. Those are really enjoyable times. And I know Bill and myself and Hugh all enjoyed that tremendously. So we just then said we'd do another one. And that first one was in November 2020, and Victoria was still locked down. So none of the Victorians could come. So we said we'd do one in the autumn and we'd go to Victoria. So chose Beechworth. And the theory or the idea behind that was we wanted a place that was accessible, there was some accommodation, but it was regional. There was a bit of proof of work required to get there. And, a few of us have grown up in small country towns, and, 40 or 50 people rolling into the town for the weekend and spending up big on beer and steak and coffee and accommodation is a material boost to those small town economies. And so, that generates a positive vibe as well.
It's such a great story. I love it. The thing I guess I'd love to flesh out a bit here. First of all, ideas are very compelling. Ideas supersede lifetime in some sense. You look at some of the religions that have existed over multi generations as an example, or even scientific theories or whatever you want to jump into. But this is a nascent technology, a cryptocurrency, and potentially is the base currency of the world forever. And yet most people haven't adopted it or haven't realized it yet. And there are small pockets of people all over the world right now adopting this decentralized system. And what you've just described is a very small microcosm of what we happen to be experiencing right now in Australia, in a tiny community of people. And You guys obviously had a relatively engaged group of friends in Brisbane or Sydney or Canberra or wherever you may have been. You're interested in Bitcoin. You've been to some previous meetups, and before you know it, you've sent a couple of tweets out, and you've got 40 people physically to Murrurundi in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, as far as I'm concerned. Like, Australia is massive. When you're like, oh yeah, like we'll drive on the Friday. It's like, how long is it to drive from Murrurundi to Brisbane? Just out of interest.
About 9 hours or something.
Yeah, bang. There you go. 9 hours. Who drives 9 hours? Do you know what I mean? This is a long way for me as a Brit. Like, you don't just get in the car and do 9 hours. Like, you're in Scotland.
Sure. There was three of us, right? And we took turns at driving.
Yeah.
We had Bitcoin podcasts.
Yeah.
And we were all just happy to be getting out of town, getting out of Queensland,
Awesome.
and going to spend the weekend talking to corn. So it just passed in a heartbeat.
It flew past. Of course it did. And I love this concept of, proof of work is such an important part of the design of Bitcoin. The concept of, doing the work in order to, get the value, basically. And, how important is it then going forwards for the Bitcoin Bush Bash to host events in slightly more difficult to reach destinations? And what do you think that means for the type of people that actually make it there? And if I could blend that question with the point I just made about this decentralized network of people around the world getting together and doing this stuff, like, how powerful do you think that is?
I think it's really powerful, and it's powerful because it's resilient. And the thing that a couple of things warmed my heart about the Bush Bash. One was when we first did it in Murrurundi, how much positive feedback we got about doing it, and from people there, and then people who just volunteered to run sessions and do things, and continue to do so. And then when we did the second one and went to Beechworth, not very many Victorians came, actually. I don't really know why that was the case. That they certainly made up for it. They made up for it in autumn this year. But at that second one, there were still people who came out of the woodwork and offered to do sessions. In fact, they said, "Oh, I want to do this session. Like, would that be all right? Can you fit me in?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And that's just been fabulous. It's not my show. I'm happy to put effort in to help coordinate it and organize it, but and I'm always happy to talk about Bitcoin. I've got an endless stream of Bitcoin things to talk about if people are interested, but it's not my show. And in some ways, Beechworth this year was a good example of that. In terms of, I got food poisoning on the Thursday night before coming up to Beechworth. Felt pretty average on Friday. Saturday morning was less than stellar, and then just had to go and crash on Saturday afternoon. Sunday was a bit tough, but then when I get home on Monday, I'm still feeling really, really rough. Turns out I had the Rona. So not only did I have food poisoning, as a bonus, somewhere along the line, I've picked up COVID and spent a very rough week after that. But that's not the point. The point is the Bush Bash just kept on going. Everyone had a great time. Didn't need me, and that's how it should be.
And so this phrase resilient, if Bitcoin is the most resilient thing we've ever built, what does that mean? And is there any connection to your understanding of complex systems? So drawing it right back to your expertise, is that something that to you is an attractive characteristic and gives you extra conviction in Bitcoin?
I think for money and potentially global money, it is a hugely important thing, a critical thing. And Bitcoiners are part of that, in the sense that they are a a social layer. So you get to a certain point of understanding with Bitcoin and you go, holy moly, this is really important. Really important. Everybody needs to know about this. Wait, everybody needs to know about this right now. And everybody you meet and you talk to about Bitcoin, because it's unbelievable that they don't understand. And it's super important that they do. And the closer you are to them and the more that they are, sort of in your life, part of your sort of heart song, if you like, then the more important it is that they understand it, which of course probably pushes the majority of them away, which is probably why most Bitcoiners would reflect that it's very hard to orange pill your own partners and family, but your own partners and family will quite happily listen to other Bitcoiners who then become a source of truth, perhaps just replaying exactly the same thing that you said 423 other times, but this time it's coming from someone who possibly actually knows what they're talking about, as opposed to it's just dad or it's just him.
Yeah, shut up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's fun,
so
isn't it?
hugely, resilience is hugely important. And I think if you want another example of concrete systems and the importance of resilience, supply chains would be a great one. So supply chains and the efficiency of supply chains that have been achieved up until recently have had an implicit reliance upon good trade relations and efficient and uninterrupted transport mechanisms, and none of those things are now holding true. So all of a sudden, assumptions that we hadn't even realized we'd made are now very, very obvious. So resilience is that quality that allows us to continue on when things break. Some things break without everything breaking.
Yeah, so that last statement almost really catches my attention. So some things can break, but everything else carries on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important part of this, isn't it? Because the government's going to kill it, or the internet will get switched off, or any number of the usual reasons that people think Bitcoin won't succeed. Actually, if it is as resilient as we think it is, then one government might try and ban it, multiple governments might try and ban it, but it's not going to kill it. Or equally, like they might turn the internet off in some part of the world, but like try doing it totally across the globe, and try taking out every single decentralized node that exists today with the record of every single transaction since inception. It's largely impossible. At least we hope it is. Touch wood. A lot of value is riding on it, but it's unlikely that those things will happen. Yeah, really interesting.
But even if they do, then the checks and balances against that causing catastrophic failure are already there. Now, certainly, if you listen to, say, Luke Dash Jr., he would argue vociferously that not nearly enough Bitcoiners are running full nodes, which is why most Bitcoiners talk about the importance of doing that. Partly that's for distributing the validation of blocks widely, which makes the entire network harder to shut down, but also it's for the individual privacy and sovereignty benefits that come from running your own node. And if power does go out at your place, or the internet goes out at your place, Jake, and you've got no power or no internet for a day, and all of a sudden your node is not synchronized to the network, as soon as that power and the internet comes back on, the node just goes, oh, where was I? I'll go and talk to some other nodes. Hey, dudes, how are you going? Yeah, good. What's the block height? Oh, shit, I need to catch up. Give me some other blocks. Give me the next block I need. Give me the next one. Okay, now I'm all good. I'm back in sync. Okay, what was it you wanted me to do, Jake? Okay.
Wow. And that's a lovely simplification as to how it would work in theory.
I know how it works in practice.
In practice, yes. Sorry, that's a much better of saying it. What I'd love to do is wind back to you mentioned you gave some presentations on Lightning. If it feels like perhaps this is a little bit of a passion of yours in the Bitcoin space specifically, would you say that's the case? And please just teach us a little bit more about the benefits of the Lightning network and some of the potential you see for
it. Yeah, definitely a passion. Probably in part because of where I came in. So, the Lightning network in 2018 was, in alpha, very, very early. I hadn't really cottoned on. I was still figuring out that Bitcoin was the only game in town. It wasn't really until the end of the year, and having been to Honey Badger, that I really understood that Lightning was part of Bitcoin, and because it was new, and because I could see that it was going to enable oh,
I can't hear you for some reason. No, that just dropped out, Tim. Oh, you're back.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where's your back? Okay. Sorry, mate. You were saying, so we were talking about the Lightning network, and in 2018, post going to Riga, you were just realizing Bitcoin was the only show in town, and yeah.
Lightning was in alpha,
Yep.
and I could see that as a scaling solution to payments, it was going to be critically important, or potentially a big part of that solution. And because it was so new, I didn't feel like I was trying to play catch up. I was kind of coming in on the ground floor along with everybody else
Yep.
learning about it.
Yeah.
And so I, what was the first one? Oh, the original Casa node. Casa originally started making packaged node solutions, and that came with a Lightning implementation. So that was my first one. That was followed fairly shortly after by MyNode. So when Taylor Helsper created the MyNode package, that was perfect because I'd not really used Linux before, and I made the decision not to use Windows for anything to do with Bitcoin, that I was going to force myself to learn Linux at the same time as I was learning about Bitcoin. And so that made things a lot more accessible, and I found that a huge learning tool. So in that early stage, Taylor was adding tool after tool after tool after tool to MyNode, and as each one came out, I'd go, oh, that's interesting. What does that do? So I'd go and take it for a test drive and learn about it. And if it was broken, then I'd try and give feedback to the developers. If there was new stuff, I'd try and test it. So I then started creating, ran a Lightning node on the MyNode box, and just started talking more about it, putting slides together, explaining to other people, helping people on Twitter who were trying to get onto Lightning. How do you set up channels? I need some inbound liquidity. Who can help? Yeah, I'll help you. So I had a reasonably well-ranked node until it imploded earlier this year. And it probably, it definitely imploded because it was way over capacity for the hardware it was running on. So I'm now building some newer hardware with a lot more capacity, and we will start again.
And to try and simplify the use case of the Lightning network for people, one of my favorite books in the Bitcoin rabbit hole has been Layered Money by Nick Bartia, and just talking about the history of money, and it puts it in this wonderful lens. It's like, what is a base layer bearer asset? And obviously we've used different types of money over time. Anyway, this concept that Bitcoin is layer one, right? And this is our digital gold in a sense, is a way of thinking about it. And then layer 2 is going to be built on top of it. And yeah, could you just talk to us a bit about what that process looks like in terms of some of the use cases that you see today or in the future, and just for anyone out there that doesn't necessarily understand like the more technical side of things and slash the use case?
Yeah, so the concept of layered design in complex software systems is very well established. It's not new, certainly not something that's been invented for Bitcoin or by Bitcoiners. And it very much plays into that earlier thread of the discussion, Jake, about resilience. So we can afford to experiment on Lightning and with Lightning, knowing that even though Lightning inherits the security guarantees of layer 1, if there's a failure at layer 2, nothing apart from the Bitcoin locked in layer 2 is at risk. And that's a really, really important thing. And it's also why the pace of development in Lightning, in the Lightning ecosystem, can move at a much faster rate, because the risk of damage is considerably less. The impact is less. So on layer 2, we inherit the security guarantees of layer 1. So Lightning channels are opened with a Bitcoin transaction and they're closed with another Bitcoin transaction. But we could establish a channel between us, Jake, and having established that channel could stay open for the next 20 years. And during those 20 years, we could transact hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, or thousands of times. We could, if the channel was large enough, we could buy and sell and transact multiple ships, sales and acquisitions. The on-chain visibility to those transactions over those 20 years is 0. All the on-chain transactions are, of course, publicly visible. The only visibility to the Lightning, public visibility to the Lightning transactions is when the channel is closed, is we can see what the closing balance was. What we can't see is what happened in the intervening period. Now, that's not to say that there are no privacy leaks in Lightning on layer 2. There certainly are, and there's a lot of work going on to improve that. And the surveillance companies like Chainalysis and Ellipsis are equally working to figure out how they can start to see what's happening on the Lightning network. But as a starting point, Lightning transactions considerably more private than Bitcoin on-chain layer 1 transactions, 100%.
And what difference do you think it might make to the everyday person in the future? The fact that you can transact a layer away from the base layer?
I think it'll fundamentally come down to size of payment and speed of settlement. So Lightning transactions, once complete, are settled. And settlement of payment is not something that happens in the traditional financial system on an instant basis. So if you're a vendor and you're selling Bitcoin for Jake t-shirts and you're using Stripe, and you've got an online shop, and I buy one of those t-shirts and I pay $30 and I put in my credit card details, you don't get that money for some period. Now, as far as I'm concerned, money comes out of my account instantly. It's gone. But it doesn't come to you for some later period. Now, 7 days, 14 days. And then it's still not settled, because I can then say, Jake never sent me the t-shirt I don't have to have an argument with you about it. I just tell Visa, never happened, never delivered. So what do? They don't even have the conversation with you. They just yank the money back. And it's not until that, it's usually 90 or 180 days on credit card rails, that the payment that I made to you for that T-shirt is considered settled. On Lightning, that happens within usually 3 to 4 seconds. On the Bitcoin main chain at layer 1, that happens every 10 minutes. And if it's a larger transaction, most people will wait 3 to 6 confirmations to consider it completely settled.
Wow, it's very interesting, isn't it? So if I could summarize, payments on the Bitcoin blockchain are not only potentially more expensive when you're sending small amounts, but completely out in the open in that it's on the public blockchain. Whereas using Lightning, there's potential privacy benefits to that, but equally it's the micropayment side of things that's infinitely cheaper and also like immediately settles, which it shits all over the traditional system, and frankly, doesn't it? Like a matter of seconds, and the vendor of something has got that money straight away. The buyer has already sent it to them, and they don't have to wait 90 to 100 days. I mean, it's mind blowing, isn't it? What's going to happen in the world of payments and finance, and this is a digital money revolution. People just haven't really realized it's happening. It's just so crazy, isn't it? Whoa.
It is, but it also means that it creates a different set of problems. So, Lightning gives you near free, instantly settled transactions. When you say micropayments, generally Lightning transactions will be settled and successful up to, I'd say, $200 or $300 is not an issue. Once you get beyond that, once you get, say, above $1,000 to $2,000, then the transactions can have a higher risk of failure because you're dependent upon the size of the channels to your destination node. But even that is being dealt with largely with Renee Picard's work on multipath payments or multi-part payments. So, there's a distinction between layer 1, the base chain, and layer 2. So layer 1, publicly visible, fee is a function of the size of the transaction, which generally is a function of the complexity of the transaction, not to do with value. That is a huge difference to the existing financial system. If you send a $300 million transaction through the existing financial system, there will be a very hefty fee for that. If you send $300 million through the Bitcoin network and it's 1 UTXO in and 2 UTXOs out, and you're patient and you pay 1 sat per byte, then you'll move that $200 or $300 million for less than $1 worth of fees.
Mind blowing.
Yeah. Whereas Lightning, there is a portion of the fee, the Lightning fee, that is a function of the value of the payment, but it's measured in parts per million. So it's still very, very small. So most Lightning fees are cents.
Well, I can already feel well, first of all, your passion for teaching about this subject comes through very clearly, but you deliver it very easily. So I'm not surprised in the slightest that your presentations in Brisbane have been received the way they have, and how these communities you're helping to grow are going in the direction that they are. We're coming up to an hour chatting, so I was just going to look to wrap it up, to be honest. Thank you so much for your time. Are there any final comments you'd like to make?
Stay humble, stack sats, teach others.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
My Twitter handle is BTC Shelling Point, SCHELLINGPT. I go through periods of prolific shit posting, and other times I'm busy doing real world stuff. always happy to talk, and I hope we see more people at Bitcoin Brisbane and at the Bush Bash. And I think what you're doing is great, Jake. It's a hugely important part of people's education journey, and keep it up. Doing a great job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Jake.
Cheers.